This is the first of an ongoing video series using only supplies found at Dollarama in order to create art. Here I'm going to show a lot of the different supplies I've been gathering for many years, and when it comes to actually making artwork, I'll only be using supplies that can be literally bought at Dollarama. However, some of the supplies are possibly not available anymore because I bought them many years ago, but I still feel I should be able to use them for this video series. I'm not going to use certain supplies if I find there's some sort of inherent risk or sensitivity associated with them, or if I just find they are far too low quality. There will also be various artworks created using different things in this series. Not everything I'm showing now will be used in this first video in the series. Future videos may also show additional materials not shown in this video, but eventually I plan to use most of the supplies shown in this video. In some cases, I will be doing paintings on three-dimensional objects, such as repainting toys and other things found. I'll also be making tabletop-related crafts with things found from Dollarama specifically, and I also intend to make other crafts, cards, and various things, although I'm also going to do more standard illustration type work. Various things are quite useful and are able to be found at Dollarama. I'm showing some scenes where I'm showing the packaging themselves. Packaging themselves can be used as a way of holding paint or paletting, and various things like ice cube trays can also be used as palettes for paint, and various ways of keeping track of notes and ideas and other things. I'm testing out some supplies that are brand new in this video as well that I hadn't had exactly before, including this new watercolor paper. These new watercolors I just got, which I knew are not going to be normal watercolors. And I'm also showing this Spinosaur, which I intend to paint over in the future using the acrylic paint. I decided not to use these two because of unknown concerning irritants, which I thought I might react badly to. I'm testing out a few different papers. I'm testing out this strange new watercolor paper I got, as well as the Tone Craft sketchbook, which I bought several years ago and I've been trying to find more of because I absolutely love them, as I've been using them for years, but lately I haven't been able to find them. I skipped ahead on some of these swatches. There's a Dollarama sketchbook, as well in regular white paper. Unfortunately, while I'd barely started testing some of these supplies, this pen broke. It broke before I even finished testing each color. It broke in place, and then when I tried to open it up to fix it, it just broke into pieces. It's just sad. I wish it was useful because it would have been nice to have as a portable option to have many colors of pen in one pen, but sometimes you get something that is garbage quality at Dollarama, and other times you get stuff that's actually very decent. So it really is a toss of the dice. Testing out these decent little art pencils you can get at the dollar store, I think that their HB and B ratings are a little different than what I'm used to for other pencils, but in general they're actually quite good pencils overall. And I'd also like to say that I feel like I'm going to be using random household garbage and recycling when moving forward with working on these videos, such as for crafting, like using old cardboard boxes and stuff, rather than 100% just what's available at Dollarama. I mean, technically you can buy cereal boxes at Dollarama and then reuse them, so I think it should still count. A while ago, I picked up these water-based craft brand markers at Dollarama that look like they're pretending to be alcohol markers, although Dollarama also had some alcohol markers. I didn't swatch the alcohol markers or test them in this video. The odors are quite strong, but I might actually be using some of the Dollarama art markers in future videos, though I didn't use them in this one. I have to say that the patterning and texture is pretty strong on this watercolor paper, and it's also very odd. It's different than any watercolor paper I've ever used, and the way it reacts to paint is also a bit different than any other paper I'd ever used. It's definitely a very unique watercolor paper that I might be able to find a way of putting to its best use, but for now I have to say it's definitely an oddball paper from just these swatching tests and later from the other tests I do. I'm also using scrap pieces of plastic and Dollarama based water brushes and some water in a jar to do different tests So I can palette water-based markers and fine liners and then mix them together and actually make a sort of watercolor wash. You can also literally water it down in this state to make more pastel colors. I'm also using ballpoint pens here, colored pencils, graphite pencils, all sorts of stuff just to really quick do tests, mixed media tests, layer tests, just to test out the paper and test out the media. There's even more things I can do, but I didn't also want to take forever at this. And I wanted to be able to test out these watercolors in actual use with each other and to test out how they work with layering. These watercolors, I'm going to call them gouache colors, are somewhere between gouache and watercolors and are definitely far more opaque than any normal watercolor is meant to be. You really need to spray them with a spritz bottle ahead of time in order to activate the color, otherwise you're not going to really get much up. The other issue with it is they seem to work very weird, although I'm going to actually test them on some higher quality and other papers to check, because also I noticed that this paper itself is very odd. But yeah, they're weird. I've tested them on several papers now, and I have to say they're weirdly thick and gouache-like, but they also don't behave in a comfortable gouache way, if that makes any sense. They're very stone-like and hard and cakey. It's a lot of trouble to get up any color, and it either works too thickly and too opaquely or too thinly. It's very odd, weird sort of watercolor. And a lot of the colors also change color in time as they dry quite dramatically. I noticed that using the white ended up being very opaque, but when you first put it down, you barely notice it. You can actually put a bunch of down and actually watch it become more visible in time, which I will show you in the second video as well more. And the other interesting thing is that there are separating colors here, which include a purple blue, a sort of rose of ultramarine, and I think that's really pretty. But it's also a very interesting effect to have in these paints. They're sort of watercolor stone, like they're very different than any other watercolors I have. I wouldn't call them a watercolor. I wouldn't call them a normal gouache. They're some sort of weird stone gouache colors, as I said. And I'm also testing out some of the different colored pencils and some of the mixed media and how this paper works. It's very interesting because this paper is weird. So I end up doing an artwork on this very strange new watercolor paper with these very strange new watercolors as the primary things. I had to work in layers. I had to wait for things to dry. And it was a very unusual experience. I have a lot of experience on different papers and mixed media. And these two things, this weird watercolor paper from Dollarama and these weird gouache colors, I tell you, they were so different. They were so different than most watercolor paper or paper in general and most things. I'm also using some of my super old, really low quality Dollarama paints that are like more than a decade old. I think I got them like way back, like 2001 or something ridiculous, and they've just been sitting around. But they're not too horrific for like really pale colors and washes, but they're weird. They're shiny, they're goopy, they're sort of not very pigmented at all, and just trying to make the best of bad supplies. So previously off camera, I designed this picture and I did it in pencil. I didn't record that process, but here's a little bit of an example of me putting pencil on the back of the page and then pushing hard on the other side to get some of the image to transfer. Very lightly, a lot of the lines didn't show up well, but I still have off camera the reference of that original pencil drawing I made, and I'm going over with different colors of the colored pencil to make a sort of colored line art version of the picture. And I know I don't need to get everything completely detailed because the watercolor is doing most of the heavy lifting there, but I still kind of wanted color hold line art on this artwork. I think off camera I'm going to use part of that original test page to test more expensive art supplies to see if I can make better use of this Dollarama paper with higher quality supplies. Over time, and I edited this video down, I did all the color line art for this, and I decided I didn't need to show you everything because it would have taken too long in the video, so I did edit it down. I also do think there were some anatomy mistakes here, but it was actually a little difficult working on this paper, and I was also working fairly quickly. As you can see, I brought that back in real quick just to get that hand basically in there. And I also think I like the overall design and the silhouette and everything, but I think I kind of want to redo this painting digitally or with better medium because I really do like the whole idea of this painting, but I don't think I did a good enough job, and I think the materials were part of the problem. but I do really like the idea of this picture. And I think the fact that the composition and the idea were so good, and some of the things about the design were so good, the idea was so good, that I think it kind of elevated it, even though the materials were quite terrible. This paper is very odd. The paint seems to stay more on the surface. It dries slower than normal, which is interesting. It works very weird. It has an odd texture. It's weirdly slippery. Sometimes the texture seems to almost be patchy, and I don't know how much of that's the paper and the paint. So I do need to do more tests on the paper with much better paint to see what problem is where. The other thing is that it pools but also spreads out. It's so hard to explain. This paper is so weird. I really do need to do more tests. I feel like I might do another video using this paper but with my higher quality supplies, and the only low quality supply I'll use is the paper. For me, a lot of my Dollarama paintbrushes, however, I consider highest quality. I really love a lot of the brushes, including the makeup brushes, which I highly recommend you use. From Dollarama. I really love them, and I use them all the time in with my other paintbrushes, and I think they're great. There's a lot of really good paintbrushes. Of course, there are some garbage ones, but some of the paintbrushes from Dollarama, I have to say, are as good as expensive full artist grade brushes, especially the makeup brushes, and there's some low cost brushes that came in packs that I find are some of my best paintbrushes I've ever owned. So for the highlights of the Microraptor here, I used some of that Rose of Ultramarine kind of color and some of the very, very dark blue kind of color. And I'm using the black for the mane because, as you know, or I don't know if you know, but as is known from reconstructing very detailed fossils with feather impressions, they are actually glossy black like crows. Their feathers were glossy black. So I'm doing a sort of Microraptor Guai, kind of a friendly friend of this character, and I decided to go with the real color of the extinct animal more than anything, but I was just reconstructing it with just a little bit of research. I didn't do too much research for the small pachycephalosaur because it's just a general fantasy picture. I decided I would rather go more realistic on the Microraptor though. And one of the reasons I decided to, because I could have done my own species of Microraptor and made it any color I want, it's fantasy, is not only to encourage people to study real paleontology and paleo art, but because I thought the contrast of a black Microraptor was really nice. In fact, one of the reasons I decided to put a Microraptor on her shoulder, I knew I wanted a dino bird. But one of the reasons I decided on Microraptor is because it's black, because it's glossy black. I just thought it would be really nice contrast. It would be a really nice bold shape. I had the idea of having it probably clinging underneath to some sort of leather back of her shirt, and the bracers to be there to be for the Microraptor to cling on more than anything. And to have it be that the contrast is very high. Now, she's actually supposed to be more of a halfling or a small elf. I do have a species of small size immortal elves that only die if they're killed in an upcoming book I'm working on, but I didn't really settle on exactly what she was. I feel like she's a little too small to be... She looks too small to me in some ways. I feel like she's probably some sort of halfling, but I didn't settle everything down exactly. The only thing I hammered in as to exactly what it is the Microraptor Guai, which is kind of funny. But I didn't want to take too long on this, and I kind of had the inspiration for this art piece. And the main inspiration was that the woman had clothing that was developed so that she could have a dino bird, like a Microraptor, climbing up on her. And I had the idea of having the Microraptor in this position. And then I wanted something by her hand, like she's petting another dinosaur of some sort. And I settled on a small kind of pachycephalosaur. And then I'm like, I better get to work because I'm starting to overthink about this. And I really am. I shouldn't get too precious because I'm going to be testing really weird supplies. I'm going to be testing these new strange gouache colors. I'm going to be testing this very oddly textured paper. Now, I feel like this paper works in an odd and different way, but that doesn't mean it's bad. That means you have to change the way you work with your mixed media art to suit the paper. So I have a lot of different papers, and I say paper testing is the number one most vital thing. You need to test your materials on the paper, and you need to figure out how to get the best use out of the paper. Don't try to force the paper to do something it simply can't do, and often don't try to force it to do something it's not good at, but it can maybe manage. Try to work with how this paper works. Sometimes that involves more practice, more tests, but usually it involves adapting the way you're working to suit the paper. So adapt the way you work to suit the paper. Don't think that you can somehow force a paper to do something it can't. One of the best examples of this is water-based markers. On mixed media and watercolor paper and certain papers, you can use water-based markers, you can palette them, you can spread out it, you can make a watercolor-like wash, you can paint using a wet paintbrush, and you can get painterly effects with water-based markers. But on the wrong paper, you can't. You'll peel the whole paper up, it'll look terrible, it simply will barely move, and you literally cannot do those techniques because it's the wrong paper. So sometimes you really got to check your paper. I have to say, the number one thing you got to check is the paper, and some paper is suitable for some things and not for others, and you have to accept that. You have to test the paper and admit the reality of the paper. A lot of people like hot press Arches or hot pressed Stonehenge or hot pressed super high quality watercolor paper specifically for mixed media because it works better for them for mixed media pieces, whereas they prefer the cold press for more pure watercolor or based on watercolor pieces. And a lot of people have come to the consensus that this seems to work better for most people, but other people use different techniques and can get great results on hot pressed paper. So it really depends on the techniques, the way you practice, and also the way you work. A certain technique or way might be more fun for you, might work better for the way your brain works. So just don't follow the herd. Find the way that works best for you. You got to go by what you like as well. So interestingly, I found this paper, like I said, very odd, different than any other paper I've ever used. I also found that this paint was odd, different than any other paint I'd ever used. It reminded me most of these old cakes of, I forget what they were called, that I got a long time ago for like 75 cents each, these big cakes. But at the same time, it wasn't quite like them. They seemed to work better. This, I have to say, these paint, it's weirdly like clumpy. It's hard to get it to flow. It has this flowing problem, and it's actually quite hard to use. And I did test it on multiple papers, so I have a few more other paper tests to do with this strange watercolor. But it honestly almost feels like it's made out of something weird. I don't know how to describe it. Almost like it's made out of like pulped up, like there's paper in there or some sort of odd plant or something. But it doesn't feel like it's made out of normal things. It doesn't feel like it's just pigment and binder. It doesn't feel like it certainly feels like there's no such thing as gum arabic in it, I'll say that. It doesn't feel like gum arabic, pigment, binder, and a bit of like pesticide to keep mold out. It feels like it's something completely different. It feels like it's made a different way. And I've heard about the old Japanese watercolor stones, and I think maybe this is more like that. This is maybe a watercolor stone and it works differently, but I don't know. It's very odd. It gets thicker, it gets more opaque. I've noticed a little bit of peeling on very thick. It's a very, very odd. At the same time, I still think the colors are nice, and I still think you can do stuff with it. I very much doubt it has any kind of light fastness. There's a super vibrant pink in here that I feel absolutely certain is not even a little bit light fast. I wouldn't trust the light fastness of any of these colors. Let me know in the comment section below if you want me to do light fastness tests with these Dollarama paints, and let me know as well how interested you are in having higher quality supply tests on this specific new odd Dollarama paper. Also, let me know any other ideas you have for anything in this series and beyond, just any ideas, any suggestions, any ideas for videos. I found that the colored pencil was very helpful in solidifying the sharpness of outlines and the way things look, and as a really useful top layer. In general, you can do this mixed media. You can mix different medias together. Now remember that when you put a lot of powdery, waxy, they're more the top layer, but it depends on which type of materials you're using and what type of paper you're using. So colored pencils, which are oily and waxy in general, should be more on top. Now I do light layers of sketching and outlining in colored pencil, but not too much before putting other things on top. Otherwise the wax or oiliness can resist materials put on top, which you might not want. You might, but you might not want. So I advise doing any touch-ups, detailing, and things like that on top. So colored pencil is usually actually the top layer when you're working with mixed media. So make sure in an area you're using a lot of colored pencil, you're not really intending on going over top of other stuff. You can still go on top if you want. You can rinse paintbrushes really well with soap and water, and you can make sure that it's not really getting into the paint. So just don't be completely terrified of doing mixed media things. A lot of people get into art supply purism, which I think is a big problem, because I think mixed media is a wonderful option for everyone to take. Now these are just some basic Inkjoy ballpoint pens. Now Inkjoy pens are available all over in general, but they are also available at Dollarama, so I took advantage of that for this video. And I definitely think that they are actually one of the higher quality supplies, even though they're not expensive at all. They are quite great because they dry quickly, you can get different tones with them, and they're also quite waterproof. So they're extremely useful in terms of using them in mixed media pieces and sketchbooks. And I do advise you try to use them. Now, the one thing is you have to push a little harder with ballpoint pens. So I find you have to try to intentionally be gentle on your wrist, or you can hurt your hands writing and drawing with them. I don't know if that's just me, but I find that I have to be intentionally careful, or I actually can get some fatigue in my hand and wrist from using them. So in the end, I'm actually pretty proud of this artwork, and I think it turned out really well, but I think that was because of the idea and in spite of the supplies. Once again, that's all for this video. If you like my videos, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell to all notifications so you will know when a new video comes up. I aim for new videos every Wednesday, but sometimes life happens and things are delayed. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you with another one very soon. Bye!